Hello everyone, welcome to session 5 of Figma tutorial. In this session, you will learn about the effects in Figma. Okay, when you select an element in Figma, there is a part in the design section called effects. If you click on the plus sign, you can access the list of effects. As you can see here, we have 4 items called inner shadow, which is used to create a shadow inside a shape, drop shadow, which is used to create an outer shadow, layer blur, which is used to blur layers, and background blur, which is used to blur the background of layers. Well, let's go to the default item, which is drop shadow. When you select drop shadow, you can access the settings of this section by clicking on this icon. Let me zoom in on this area. As you can see from this section, we can move the shadow in the x-axis. It is the same for the y-axis. From the blur section, you can increase the amount of blur. Also, from the spread section, by increasing this value, you can increase or decrease the spread of the shadow as you can see. From this section, we can choose the shadow color, and from this part, we can change the opacity of the shadow. Well, to remove this effect, just click on the minus item. Let's move on to the next effect, which is inner shadow. Its settings are exactly like drop shadow, except that it creates an inner shadow for you. You can move the shadow in the X or Y direction, thus increasing or decreasing the amount of blur. And from the spread part, you can change the extent of the shadow like this. And I already explained the color and opacity. Well, let's move on to the next effect, which is layer blur. For this, I choose this shape. Then I go to the effects, and from here I select the layer blur option. If you click on this icon, as you can see, here we have only one option to change the amount of blur. The more you increase the amount of blur, as you can observe, the blurring of your shape will increase. Now let's go to the last effect, which is the background blur. For this, you need to have another element like this image. I zoom in on this image here. I select the rectangle tool from the toolbar. I click and drag on this area. From this part, I increase the corner radius like this, and by moving this rectangle and with the help of this guideline, I place the rectangle in line with the vertical axis of the image. Now I go to the background blur effects. I click on the plus sign. Here, by clicking on the background blur, you can access its settings. It is exactly the same as the layer blur. As you can see, nothing has happened here. The reason is that this effect depends on the opacity of the fill part. If I set the opacity to 50%, as you can see, the opacity of the fill will decrease by 50%, but our background is blurry. If I turn off the eye of this effect, you can see that it is more transparent. But if I turn on the eye, you can see the blur in this part. Let me reduce the opacity to 30% and increase the blur from this part. As you can observe here, this way you can specify the amount of background blur for the elements. Well, I set the opacity to 50% and the blur value to number 5. Now I go to the stroke item and select a white stroke with a stroke weight of 1. Now I want to get a copy of this name from here. For this, I go to the text tool. I click on this area twice to select all the characters. I will copy this name by pressing Ctrl and C, and I will paste this text here by right-clicking and selecting Paste Here. I press V key to select the Move tool and move this text like this. Okay, we can also make this shape smaller. By selecting this text from the text section settings, we can also edit the typography. For example, I set the font weight to bold and make the text color white. Very well, in this session we got to know the effects in Figma. You can use these effects in different projects.